And eventually they actually start using the term Afrikaner, which is interesting because the Boer, the Dutch who are living in South Africa, will eventually dump the name Boer and switch it to Afrikaner and basically steal Afrikaner from the Griqua, from the colored population. And
guys, so Minister Mackenzie has been really bullish on the cause of the COLOUREDS in South Africa. He's been really going deeper into the history of the COLOUREDS in South Africa, really raising the issue of the revolutionaries during the fight against apartheid, of those who were COLOUREDS in South Africa, really declaring that, COLOUREDS were actually betrayed at Codesa, and argues also that COLOUREDS were actually usually malaligned, that they are not Africans, but he's arguing that COLOUREDS are Africans, whether Africa likes it or not. So these are many issues Gaten Mackenzie is actually using to push, the consciousness of the COLOUREDS in South Africa to prepare for a possible presidency, so to speak, so that at the end of the day, if he gets into power in South Africa, the COLOUREDS would have this mindset, of leadership to be able to ascertain their position in South Africa. It appears from the rhetoric of Gaten Mackenzie that the COLOUREDS in a way have been submerged in South Africa, and he really wants to bring that coloured power, that coloured consciousness back to life. And for me, many times I've really struggled to really understand who the COLOUREDS really are, and here and there, there's been really multiple arguments that they're a mixed breed of the Khoi and the San and all of that, until I met this doctor, Professor of Government at Houston College, Dr. Roy Casagranda. Really smart, really brilliant, intelligent. I usually follow his lectures closely, and on this particular lecture where he did a history of South Africa in commemoration of Nelson Mandela, he's actually unveiling to us who the COLOUREDS really are. And trust me, it's really not what you would presume or imagine. And for me, it's really striking to really know who the COLOUREDS really are in South Africa. And I really hope that probably, with this understanding, the COLOUREDS can actually get to really slowly understand who they really are and probably take their place and emerge at some point, in this whole debacle of the blacks and the COLOUREDS being lower paced in society. They can slowly start building themselves up and probably emerge into a healthy competition with the whites and the Indians, as you heard from Dr. Lehotla on how the whites and the Indians left the COLOUREDS and the blacks behind. Probably this kind of analysis could help them really understand who they really are and maybe move, with really dedicated and intentional steps in growing their communities and emerging as a powerful force in South Africa. Let's quickly listen to Dr. Roy Casagranda break down who really the COLOUREDS in South Africa are. And I'll be back for a really interesting analysis.
In South Africa, there are 4 basic race categories. It's a little bit more complicated than that because during apartheid, they actually created 13 nations within the 4 race categories. And then there's the complexity of what do you do with the East Asian population and the Chinese population. It was a small population, but it didn't neatly fit into the other 4 race categories. So when I say there's 4 race categories, it's a little complicated. Obviously, white was one of the race categories. Black was the other race category. And then Indian. A huge population of Indians moved into South Africa during the British imperial period, especially in Natal, especially in the Durban area. And in fact, today, South Africa is about 2.5% Indian. So that Indian population is still there and it's thriving and it's very heavily involved in business and politics. It's not a completely marginalized, forgotten population. It's an active population. The 4th race category has a term that I think most Americans find offensive. They don't. That's how they use the term. So I'm going to use it. If I'm running into your sensitivity, I'm sorry. It doesn't make sense as a non-South African, as a white American, for me to just start renaming groups. So I have to use the group name. It's colored with a U, if it makes you feel any better. So when you refer to them, you say COLOUREDS, right? It's the colored people. So what's interesting about this, and the reason I'm bringing it up right now, is that population, that racial category, actually started almost right away. and began to evolve. Because one of the problems that the Dutch colony had early on is it came with too many men and not enough women. So a lot of men began taking wives from the slave population that they had conquered. And then they had this issue, what happens to the little half-white kids? And in the United States, our solution is part black, all black. We don't do that, right? Nobody's running around saying Obama was the 44th white president, even though his mother was white. We just see Obama as black. We don't care that. He could be 7/8 white. We would still see him as black. He's just black in our imagination. That's what we did in the United States. But in other European states, like for example the French, they created an intermediary category, and the Dutch will do the same. For the Dutch, it's colored. The French had the category of mulatto. And so in other words, being part white meant you weren't really fully black in the French Empire and with the Dutch. It meant that you did fit into a separate third category. And so little by little, that colored population starts to grow in South Africa. It goes by multiple different names. So Griqua is one of the names that gets adopted over time. And eventually they actually start using the term Afrikaner, which is interesting because the Boer, the Dutch who are living in South Africa, will eventually dump the name Boer and switch it to Afrikaner and basically steal Afrikaner from the Griqua, from the colored population. And so I guess they realized it sounded cool. And they just grabbed it and took it as their national identity. So if you're reading old stuff, when it refers to Afrikaner, make sure you know which are they, do they mean the mixed kids or do they mean the white kids? The reason I'm bringing this up is by the time of the Great Trek, so by 1833, it isn't actually just a white population that goes to Orange Free State and Transvaal. A group of Griqua also go, and so there's actually two little statelets that are created on either side of Orange Free State. One of those statelets is called East Griqua and the other one is called West Griqua. And it was an attempt by that population of sort of Dutchified, partly black people to not also be in the British Empire and to sort of make their own path, not underneath the shadow of the Dutch population. And in the shaping of South Africa, that ends up mattering. So today, blacks are about 81% of the population, so overwhelming majority. I already told you that Indians are about 2.5% of the population. Whites are about 8% of South Africa's population today. In the 1911 census, they were 22. So whites as a percentage of the population have been dramatically shrinking over the course of the last 112 years. The colored population is 9%. There's now 1% more colored than there is white. So coloreds are the second largest racial category in South Africa. What it takes to be colored, though, is not well defined because you just need to be mixed or racially ambiguous, right? So in other words, if I'm a nationalist and I walk up to you and I look at you and I study you really well, I'm like, geez, I can't tell. I don't know. Are you black? Are you Indian? Are you Chinese? Are you white? Colored you are. And they actually, at one point during apartheid, actually set up commissions to figure people out. You would show up like a courtroom case, and then you could make a plea for what you thought your race was, and then they would decide. And they would be like, all right, preponderance. And this, of course, when you think about it, is a real problem because once the South Africans do apartheid, the colored population can't live with the black population or the white population anymore. So what happens when your mom is white and your dad is black and you're colored? You can't be with your family. Isn't that cool? You have to be with the other coloreds. And so it got really ugly, really messy, really fast for that population. They are the largest growing group in South Africa. They've been growing for almost 400 years now. So, and that's still the trajectory. So it's one of the reasons why the white population is shrinking is because of mixed marriages. Another reason, of course, is immigration out of South Africa. And then, of course, the third reason is lower birth rates.
Yeah, brilliant, guys. There's really not much to say. I just really hope, for me, this lecture was really enlightening because, South Africa is a really complex society, but also really interesting because I see the power in that diversity. That if that strength of that creativity in South Africa can actually emerge and take its space on the earth, the earth will not be able to contain South Africa. So much greatness. And we've not yet tapped into the greatness of the coloureds. We've not yet tapped into the greatness of the blacks. There's these forces that actually still sort of like keep these people down. But these kinds of message are liberating to really help people really understand their identities and help them build and grow and, really see some more self-worth in their existence to be able to now build, what we call collective intelligence and collective, strength to be able to elevate their societies and their communities, and help enriching the growth that South Africa is actually looking for. But anyway, this lecture for me was very enlightening. I don't know about you. What do you guys think about Dr. Casagranda's lecture here on who the coloureds really are and how their relationship with the Afrikaners actually evolved over history? Share your thoughts in the comments.